I looked at a poem by Philip Larkin the other day, and I mentioned that Larkin was a member of the 1950s literary movement. And today I'd like to look at a poem by another member of that group, Thom Gunn. Gunn is less well known than Philip Larkin, but I think he wrote some good poetry, especially in his early career. I feel that later on his poems became rather mundane, but in the early days he had seemed to have a wish to write about great themes and archetypes. And there is one great poem, I think, from, or at least very good poem, from his first collection, Fighting Terms, which was published in 1954, the year after he graduated from Cambridge University. So I should begin, I guess, by reading the poem, which probably most people will not know. It's not very... Most people interested in poetry are probably not really familiar with it these days. So it's called The Wound. The huge wound in my head began to heal about the beginning of the 7th week. Its valleys darkened, its villages became still. For joy I did not move and dared not speak. Not doctors would cure it, but time, its patient skill. And constantly my mind returned to Troy. After I sailed the seas I fought in turn, on both sides, sharing even Helen's joy of place, and growing up to see Troy burn as Neoptolemus, that stubborn boy. I lay and rested, as prescription said, maneuvered with the Greeks or sallied out each day with Hector. Finally my bed became Achilles' tent, to which the loud Thersites came reporting numbers dead. I was myself, subject to no man's breath. My own commander was my enemy, and while my belt hung up, sword in the sheath, Thersites shambled in and breathlessly cackled about my friend Patroclus' death. I called for armor, rose, and did not reel, but when I thought, rage at his noble pain flew to my head, and turning, I could feel my wound break open wide. Over again I had to let those storm-lit valleys heal. I remember this poem had a big effect on me when I first read it. I was particularly interested in ancient history and the classics and classical literature, the Iliad, the Odyssey, Greek drama, and it seemed a huge step of confidence that somebody, a poet, would put himself in the place of Achilles, and not only Achilles, but the consciousness of it seems in the poem, the consciousness of the poet seems to move from body to body and place to place. He's on both sides. He's Achilles, and he's Achilles' son Neoptolemus, and he's sallying out with Hector, and yet he's fighting with the Greeks, and he seems to be a consciousness that has taken the Trojan War from classical literature and is using it as a great metaphor to move around in, and to try to appreciate and be a part of the great themes and passions of that time and place. So it begins, the huge wound in my head began to heal about the beginning of the 7th week. Gunn was a new poet when he wrote this, and you can imagine him perhaps starting a lot of things that he never finished, and there's a certain uncertain quality perhaps about the early lines, like you're not sure where he's going, and you wonder if he knew exactly where he was going himself with it. So what's the wound? Did he know he was going to start talking about Achilles after he's brought up this metaphor of the wound in his head? Perhaps he did, or perhaps it developed as he went along. So the huge wound in my head began to heal about the beginning of the 7th week. Its valleys darkened, its villages became still. For joy I did not move and dared not speak. Not doctors would cure it, but time, its patient skill. So, no mention of Achilles or Troy or ancient literature here. It could be going in any direction after the first stanza. It's only at the beginning of the second stanza that the direction definitely turns towards Troy. You wonder if he himself just wrote that first stanza as a great metaphor and then wondered where he could take it and decided that he would go in the direction of Achilles and Troy. The first line of the second stanza, and constantly my mind returned to Troy. So it's somebody who's definitely thinking about Troy all the time. Could be anyone at this point. Could be Hector, could be Achilles or Odysseus, Agamemnon. And constantly my mind returned to Troy. After I sailed the seas, I fought in turn on both sides, sharing even Helen's joy of place, and growing up to see Troy burn as Neoptolemus, that stubborn boy. So, of course, Achilles never actually saw Troy burn because he was killed by a poison arrow in the heel by Paris before the destruction of Troy. But yeah, he could see the destruction of Troy as Neoptolemus, his own son. Neoptolemus was Achilles' son, so the consciousness of the poet is moving from hero to hero. I lay and rested, as prescription said, maneuvered with the Greeks, or sallied out each day with Hector. So he's maneuvering with the Greeks, and he is sallying out each day with Hector as a great Trojan hero. Is he Paris? We don't know. He's occupying the body and minds of different heroes from this saga. Finally, my bed became Achilles' tent. So he is Achilles. In fact, there is no reference. He has become Achilles. There is no reference before this point to him specifically being Achilles. Constantly my mind returned to Troy, sailed the seas and fought on both sides, sharing Helen's joy of place. And he was Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, watching Troy burn. He lay and rested because of the wound in his head. He maneuvered with the Greeks and he sallied out with Hector. So to this point, he's definitely a hero in the Trojan War, but doesn't specifically see him as Achilles. It's only at this point that he enters the body and mind of Achilles. Finally, my bed became Achilles' tent, to which the loud Thersites came reporting numbers dead. Thersites, the hated messenger. I was myself. It's a rather strange thing to say after he's been moving around from character to character so much. I was myself subject to no man's breath. My own commander was my enemy. That's Agamemnon. So Agamemnon, the king of the Greeks, and Achilles hated each other because of the disagreement over Briseis, the slave girl. She was Achilles' slave girl, and then Agamemnon took her for himself when he lost his own slave girl. So they hated each other. My own commander was my enemy. And while my belt hung up, sword in the sheath, Thersites shambled in and breathlessly cackled about my friend Patroclus' death. So now he's become Achilles. At the key moment is his friend Patroclus has been killed by Hector, and Thersites comes and tells him about it. And now, in the story of the Trojan War, Achilles goes out and kills Hector, the great hero of Troy. So, he's become Achilles at the crucial moment. It seems that he kind of sees himself. He is overwhelmed by the story of the Greeks and the images and the archetypes that it presents for the poet, and he wants to get inside the mind of all the characters, but most of all, he wants to get inside the mind of Achilles, especially at this crucial moment. I called for armor, rose, and did not reel, but when I thought, rage at his noble pain flew to my head, and turning, I could feel my wound break open wide. Over again, I had to let those storm-lit valleys heal. Well, this is rather different to the Iliad, where Achilles is not ill or sick or wounded. He's just simply sulking in his tent because he doesn't want to help Agamemnon and the Greeks after Agamemnon stole his slave girl. But here he is sick. He has a wound in his head, and when he rises up with the intention of going to kill Hector, and we know that is what happens in the story, here it's different. He reels and he has to wait. He has to let those storm-lit valleys heal. So what is the wound? It's hard to say. Is it something the poet has suffered? Is it the poet's propensity to be able to use his imagination to get into the minds of literary characters from the past, and he is able to become all these characters by an act of poetic and artistic empathy, and yet it drains him of all energy, something that he cannot keep up, and yet when everything is working right, it seems so real to him. He can be all these characters. He can relive the Trojan War of the Iliad, and it's like it seems to me like a young man overwhelmed with all the literary images of the great classical past, and he wants to put himself in the shoes of all these people, and he wants to become a part of it, and he wants to tell the story, and he wants to tell his own stories, and he wants to become a great poet like Homer that can speak to generations. It's like a kind of hope for the future, and a great metaphor, really. The wound in his head, maybe it's a poet's propensity to want to write great poetry in the future and to be a great poet, and to join the immortals like Homer Shakespeare and all, and the writers who created all these great characters, and the excitement of it all kind of incapacitates him. He's overwhelmed. That's what I get from it. It's a moment in his career when he's just like 23 or 24, probably just finished university, and his whole life lies before him, and he doesn't know what he will be able to achieve as a poet, and he hopes that he can join the greats. Personally, I think this is the greatest poem he wrote. I was a bit disappointed when, after reading this and then reading his other work, it's almost like everything that came later is totally different to this. Could almost be written by a different person, but he was still finding his feet at this time, and I think just miraculously he hit on a great idea and a great metaphor, and he found the right words to express himself. It's sad I don't think that he wrote anything else as good later on. If we just look at the structure a little bit, then we can say it's a kind of loose iambic pentameter, and yeah, we have the stanzas of 5 lines rhyming A, B, A, B, A. That's A, B, A, B, A. I lay and rested as prescription said. Yeah, it's mostly iambic pentameter, but it's quite lucid. Sometimes it's goes between a lot of different rhythms and usually comes back to iambic pentameter. It's very traditional, really, almost Shakespearean. And that, like I say, I think it works really great. So maybe I should finish by just reading it one more time. The Wound by Thom Gunn. The huge wound in my head began to heal about the beginning of the 7th week. Its valleys darkened, its villages became still. For joy I did not move and dared not speak. Not doctors would cure it, but time, its patient skill. And constantly my mind returned to Troy. After I sailed the seas, I fought in turn on both sides, sharing even Helen's joy of place, and growing up to see Troy burn as Neoptolemus, that stubborn boy. I lay and rested as prescription said, maneuvered with the Greeks, or sallied out each day with Hector. Finally my bed became Achilles' tent, to which the lout Thersites came, reporting numbers dead. I was myself, subject to no man's breath. My own commander was my enemy, and while my belt hung up, sword in the sheath, Thersites shambled in and breathlessly cackled about my friend Patroclus's death. I called for armor, rose, and did not reel, but when I thought, rage at his noble pain flew to my head, and turning, I could see my wound break open wide. Over again I had to let those storm-lit valleys heal. The last stanza seems almost like the poet's overwhelmed with images and metaphors and his own skills and wishes for the future. The wound is the poet exhausting himself with all the thoughts of the great classical literature from the past, which he hopes to join now and become a part of in the future. The young man's ambition to become great. It's a young man's poem, and I think it works really well, better than anything else he did.